So as we inch closer to the upcoming June Nintendo Direct, today I want to have a conversation about what our chances are of seeing the big return for Donkey Kong to potentially be at this Nintendo presentation. Now, there are a couple different things in the rumor mill speculation talk for Donkey Kong, but the reality is that we have not seen a fresh title for DK since 2014, February 2014 to be exact, when Tropical Freeze was indeed released on the Wii U. That means, yes, your math is right, it has been well over 10 years now since we have seen anything fresh in terms of a new game experience for DK. Now, of course, Tropical Freeze was ported to the Nintendo Switch in 2018 with the Funky Kong mode included as kind of an easy mode, but nonetheless, it is still largely, well, it is the same game with the Funky Kong mode included. And in this video specifically, I want to tackle just how likely it is to maybe expect something from Donkey Kong in this upcoming Nintendo Direct, and more broadly, what kind of project we might see from Donkey Kong next, because there are rumors of a 3D Donkey Kong game being in development, a canceled project that may or may not still be out there behind the scenes somewhere, and there's also ideas of some classic remasters from Donkey Kong maybe being the next project, or even the possibilities of a Kirby and the Forgotten Land gameplay style for DK's next game. So we'll get on the same page with all of that. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And I want to first kick it off with the possibility of a 3D Donkey Kong game and what actually happened with one of these projects, because there is some proof that once upon a time there was indeed a 3D Donkey Kong in development after Tropical Freeze, but it got canceled. And you can see this article posted up from Go Nintendo, which outlines the following. Did you know Gaming Explorer's canceled 3D Donkey Kong game from Vicarious Visions no longer on like Donkey Kong? Donkey Kong is one of Nintendo's most popular mascots, and yet we haven't had a brand new Donkey Kong platformer since Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze in 2014. One possible reason we haven't seen any movement on this front is that there was a Donkey Kong game in the works from developer Vicarious Visions, but was canceled. However, there's never been any confirmation on this front one way or the other. In a new deep dive video from Did You Know Gaming, they examined all the possible angles of this rumored Donkey Kong game. According to at least one source, it was a 3D platformer known as Donkey Kong Freedom, which included Pauline as a playable character. Vicarious Visions was the game's original developer, but it was eventually given to Nintendo EPD in 2018 and hasn't been heard of since. So as someone who thoroughly enjoys every 2D Donkey Kong Country game in the series, I am well aware that there is a whole unexplored land of possibilities of bringing DK into the 3D world. Yes, we saw it with Donkey Kong 64 from Rare back in the day, but times have changed since the N64, and there's a lot Nintendo could do with a 3D Donkey Kong game nowadays. And if indeed this rumored Donkey Kong Freedom was a project once upon a time but was handed off from Vicarious Visions to Nintendo EPD in 2018, was that project just scrapped and canceled, or has Nintendo used some kind of elements from the base of the idea of the game but they're really trying to reinvent it? One thing that's for certain with DK is that Nintendo really does want to reinvent and elevate this franchise to a new level. We're seeing things like their mainstream Nintendo World theme parks support Donkey Kong as the first expansion, and even the one here in Orlando opening up, I believe in 2025 if I'm not mistaken, we'll have a Donkey Kong section of the theme park day one when it opens. You also look at the mass market success that was the Super Mario Bros. Movie, and Donkey Kong is heavily involved in that plot line, and no doubt Nintendo wants to capitalize on all the eyeballs that have seen Donkey Kong for the first time with a big return with some kind of big new breakout game. Now, the big question in my mind around Donkey Kong having something in the 3D world starts to become, is it really time to see this type of Donkey Kong project on the current Nintendo Switch? And that's where my expectations start to lower, because while I do think that we are going to see some kind of 3D entry in the Donkey Kong series one day, I also believe that it is very likely saved for Nintendo's next gen hardware. And while there's absolutely a shot we see something from the DK franchise show up at this Direct, I am thinking that the big 3D project, whatever Freedom was, whether that's tied to the roots of that game or not, I think something like that, a big ambitious 3D, maybe more open traversal style Donkey Kong game, will be saved for next gen hardware in my personal opinion. There is a world though where I could see Nintendo taking that Kirby and the Forgotten Land style level progression and giving that gameplay experience to Donkey Kong, because they really seem like they would go hand in hand. It's more of a fixed camera and not so much free roaming, not a free open exploration or open world game by any stretch of the imagination, but rather there's stages with specific parts you're going to come across, different puzzles along the way, lots of different enemies to take out on screen, and you get towards the end of the stage and you do a boss fight. I could definitely see that Kirby and the Forgotten Land gameplay core style transitioning perfectly into a Donkey Kong game, but even a project of that scope still seems more likely saved for next-gen hardware, which takes me to the most likely type of Donkey Kong project that I think if we see anything at this direct from DK, it would be something more akin to this, and that is a new 2D entry in the series or a remaster of some classic Donkey Kong games in the franchise, maybe even remake, like legitimately from the ground up. Retro Studios developed Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze. We know they are still hard at work on Metroid Prime 4, with even pretty recent job postings still being cited online for that project. However, we also don't know that because of how long it's been that Retro has had Metroid Prime 4, that they may be developing a secretive project on the side, and maybe we would get some kind of sequel to Tropical Freeze. Still another Donkey Kong Country game, but a brand new top tier 2D platformer once again. I definitely think that something like that is on the table, or what I think would be the perfect way to cap off the Nintendo Switch's life cycle, and maybe the most likely out of any of these game scenarios in terms of ones that could show up at the June Direct presentation, is none other than some kind of Donkey Kong Country Trilogy remastered HD collection. I think if you just throw HD textures, give it kind of a new Super Mario Bros. Treatment, a modern coat of paint with quality of life improvements, and have the original soundtrack intact, or even the option to toggle between a modern day remastered one like we've seen Nintendo do with Super Mario RPG and Paper Mario Thousand Year Door most recently, I think a collection of the classic 1 through 3 Donkey Kong Country games would be incredible. And while there's really no rumors or leaks suggesting that any kind of such collection exists, I sure would love to see it as a fan, and I'm sure many of you would as well, as Donkey Kong Country 1 through 3 and really 1 and 2 for me are regarded as literally some of the best 2D platformers in existence, period. I would argue that to this day, out of every 2D platformer, Donkey Kong Country 2 is my favorite, and that's really saying something because I enjoy 2D platformers. I mean, Mario Wonder's ranked up there now most recently. That was an incredible playthrough of a 2D awesome game, but if Nintendo does indeed choose to remaster Country 1 through 3 and give it a holiday release window, I think it does really solid sales numbers, and I think it's one of those fan service projects that just people would absolutely lose their minds for if we saw it. But I will say, while I am expecting big things from this Nintendo Direct, it also feels like, due to where we know the Nintendo Switch is in its life cycle, which is at the end, and yes, there will still be some smaller projects supported over the years, but once Nintendo talks about next gen hardware and they put out their big new 3D Mario and big new launch lineup for the Switch 2, we're going to largely quickly see them shift focus to promoting that console as their new flagship hardware, and they're going to forget about the Switch and support for it pretty quickly, in my opinion. So while there is a chance DK shows up at this Direct, I also think that out of the franchises we've suggested about being there so far, like Metroid and Zelda, DK has a lower shot on the list compared to those particular franchises. Even though he is long overdue for a return, it feels like at the end of the Nintendo Switch's life cycle, it may or may not be a simple remaster project. That probably is a best case scenario, and the big 3D Donkey Kong, or the next big Donkey Kong experience, may indeed be saved for Switch 2 and probably closer in line to the launch time of the Donkey Kong expansion for the Nintendo World theme park and the new one opening up here in the US. So let me know in the comments down below what you hope we see from DK next, and if you think there's any shot that he shows up at this Nintendo Direct presentation with a new game intact, or if you think we will be waiting until into the Nintendo Switch 2's generation at some point to see DK return to a Nintendo console. So thanks so much for watching the video today, everyone. Make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless of if we agree or disagree. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.